you know. It's the same between Mexico and Spain. There are words that are a little different and things like that. But the idea gets through. Even in South America, each country has kind of its own, you know,
Dialect, maybe.
Dialect, yeah.
No, not
yeah,
that. It's not that
special word. Well, even in the
distinct.
United
Yeah.
States, for example,
Mhm.
you've got
In the
the
South.
North and the South, and
Mhm.
and even in the UK, you've got Ireland over there, and you've got Scotland, and I'm sorry, but when I was over there, I really had trouble with understanding the Scots. After after but you eventually figure it out. But yeah, I haven't checked it, the translations or anything else, but I look forward to that. It's going to be interesting, and the book and the important thing is the book and the information are going to get to a lot more people now, and I think that's the important thing. So thank you.
What's Hugh putting in the chat? Hugh, what you put in the chat? Hugh?
My wife said a big book study retreat this weekend
Uh-huh.
in Long Branch, New Jersey. She
Yeah.
texted me this morning. She said, "What book is The Writing of the BB? Do we have it? Is it the big book?"
Oh
The
my
guy here
God.
said it's amazing. I wrote her back and said, "We already have two copies."
That's how you
One in
snare.
hardback and one in paperback, probably, right? Yeah.
No, one first edition and one later edition.
I have the audio book. I have the Kindle version. I have the original first edition, and now I have the Spanish edition. I haven't bought
Wow.
the Kindle Spanish yet. Doesn't seem to be available quite yet. I think it says something like within 2 weeks or something like that when you try to buy it. So, but I have other people who speak Spanish who are also buying the book and waiting for the Kindle.
Yeah, I only have, in fact, Jim, I'm going to bring, not Jim, Bill, I'm going to bring the book with me when I come to see you, which you don't know, but I'm coming to see you. You told me to call. I haven't yet. But anyway, I'm going to bring my edition. I only have the one book and the one audio. That's it. So I've got to catch up to everybody else with a couple editions.
Okay, well, Bob Ed, I would love to see you, but you got to give me a heads up. I am the
I
busiest
promise.
82-year-old guy in the state of Connecticut. I am typically booked from the time I hit the
I
office
know.
in the morning until the afternoon. So
I'm not being inappropriate. I'm so
no,
sorry.
no, I want
I
to
will
see
have a
you.
date. No,
Just
I'll have a date. We're my sister's in Westport. We'll talk offline. We'll
Yeah.
good.
talk offline. But thank you.
Well,
I'll be appropriate. I promise.
well,
I will
while you're
respect
doing
your time. I
while,
know.
while you're doing that, I just want to tell you what we have coming up for this month. We have, as Bob Kay would call them, the key players. We're going to be looking at Bobby B. With Gary Neihart, his book, of course, The Untold Story of Bobby B. And then we're doing Charles Towns with Gary, of course, on the 12th of June. Charlie Towns at Towns Hospital, or Charles Towns at Town Hospital. Then we have Pat O'Donnell coming out of retirement. Pat is going to do take the cobwebs off of Sam Shoemaker and going to tell us more about Sam Shoemaker. And then we're going to learn more about Richmond Walker again. Pat. And then for July, quickly do this for you because we're going to start a new. We're going to look at Shearberg's YouTube channel. We're going to do a new one on that. Once a month, we're going to look at. I'm going to start with obviously number one. Big Book History number one, the first two forwards. We're going to go through all those, hopefully, a month at a time, if you want. So we're going to do something on Shearberg stuff. And Jim is with us 3 times in that month, Jim.
Yeah, the third is the recovery rates in AA, and then the 17th. Well,
you have
that's going to be Don
Joe and
Latin.
Charlie you have then, Jim.
Yeah, I've got the 24th is the Big Book Awakening period, and with Joe and Charlie, and of course Mac Cheater in Canada, and the others of the Big Book Awakening time, and then on the 31st, Myths, Legends, and Changes in the Big Book.
Wow. And as Jim touched on there, we're going to have Don Latin, Jim, we've got, haven't we, on the 17th. He's going to talk
Yes.
about Bill Wilson, psychedelics, and the 12 steps. So looking forward to those.
Yeah, he was with us, I think, in
22, 23,
2023.
yeah.
He wrote two books, uh, Distilled Spirits and God on Psychedelics, right?
God, I'm saying that. What a great title. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. That we're looking forward to all that. But tonight we're doing, or today we're doing, or this morning, wherever you are, we're doing Writing the Big Book, The Creation of AA. We have chapter 18, and we're on chapter 18. It's titled Two Wives, and we're in October to November 1938. We have the author with us, Bill Shepherd. But first, we have Jim Worley out of AA History Only is going to be reading for us. And we have other members are going to read as well. So, Jim, I'm going to put it up on the screen. So, when you're ready, we over to you, Jim Worley. It's on page 347 to 361. And Jim Worley, as I said, is with AA History Only.
Thank you, David. Chapter 18, Two Wives, October to November 1938. And perhaps no chapter in the big book is more dated and more reflective of its own time than Two Wives. The prejudices and preconceptions regarding women that were so much a part of the cultural landscape in 1938 are glaringly on display in almost every paragraph here. At this time, Bill Wilson and his cohorts in the fellowship, predominantly middle-class American men, generally understood the word alcoholic as an almost exclusively male noun, with women relegated to the role of subservient helpmate in every area of a couple's life.
On one level, this should surprise no one. Women had been actively fighting for recognition and respect for more than a century in America, but had won the right to vote only 18 years before this chapter was written. The long American arc of women's liberation, stretching back to Frances Wright in the early 1800s and extending through Susan B. Anthony and other early figures for women's equality throughout that century, had made some progress, but only some. Still to come for the feminist movement was the emergence of quote-unquote Rosie the Riveter during the Second World War, and the gradual acceptance of women working outside the home in the 1950s. This would be followed by the tumultuous rebellion that broke out in the 1960s in response to the callously dismissive treatment women had endured during the previous 20 years of financial prosperity and growth. But beyond the pervasive 1938 cultural deprecation of women, there were two additional factors operative in early AA history that produced an almost total identification of the word alcoholic with the married man rather than a married woman.
Prejudice against women alcoholics.
The first of these was the hostile prejudice against women alcoholics at the time. While a man could be an alcoholic and still preserve some semblance of respectability, or at least be granted that status once he became sober, the woman alcoholic was uniformly characterized as a disreputable fallen creature who was unlikely to ever regain her former reputation. This was based on the belief that while drinking, she had surely compromised her virtue to such a degree that she could never again be the kind of woman who would be received in proper society. It was a flagrant double standard, creating the firm conviction that almost all of the females who came into AA, parenthetically wives of highly successful men, were at times exempted, close parentheses, automatically deserved to be categorized as promiscuous, disgraced, and generally unredeemable women. The Akron's group experience was, quote, absolutely the first woman they ever dealt with, close quotes, who only reaffirmed this prejudice. Lil arrived on the scene in late 1935, but rather than securing her place as the first woman to get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, Lil's notoriety rests on a torrid evening she spent with Victor, another early member, as they consummated their affair on the examination table in Dr. Bob's office, parentheses, while Bob was off playing cards for the evening. Things got even more out of hand later that same night when Victor announced it was time for him to go home. and the intoxicated Lil insisted on continuing the party. She started running around the office rummaging through Bob's cabinets, stealing pills and stuffing them in her mouth. Victor had to call another member for help before they could subdue Lil and get her safely tucked away in Dr. Bob's basement, where she temporarily sobered up. Lil's uninhibited episode proved to be a bad omen for the future of women in the still unnamed Ohio recovery movement. Not surprisingly, the biggest barriers to the acceptance of women in early AA were the wives of the men who attended meetings. Quote, every woman who came in alone was like a warning signal to all the wives. They were scared to death of them. Close quotes. In late 1939, the first woman to come into Cleveland AA was reportedly, quote unquote, so bad that, quote, the wives wouldn't allow her in their homes, close quote. The position taken by the wives was that, quote, no lady would do a thing like that, close quotes. The emphasis being firmly placed on their understanding of the word, quote unquote, lady, and the unspoken licentiousness of, quote unquote, that. Nice women, they believed, just didn't drink to excess, and those who did were therefore not nice. This unforgiving attitude persisted well into the 1940s, when, for instance, a member reported overhearing one woman alcoholic advising another, quote, be darn careful how you handle yourself around these wives. They think you're the babe their husband went out with.
And we have a footnote there. This low opinion of women in AA was unfortunately not confined to the 1940s, nor were the wives of members the only ones who professed it. Female AA members could be equally harsh in their sisters in recovery. There was a front page article published in that October 1946 issue of the AA Grapevine entitled Women in AA Face Special Problems, written by Grace O. of Manhattan, that is literally shocking to 21st century sensibilities. The author's indictment of women in this long article will reward any reader seeking a better understanding of the significant prejudices and barriers blocking a woman's path to recovery in AA during the mid-1940s and beyond.
But women weren't the only problem. The men could be just as bad and often acted in ways that did nothing to alleviate their wives' fears. In mid-1939, a woman named Sylvia Kaufman arrived in Ohio from Chicago. She was 33 years old, beautiful, and rich, a, quote, glamorous divorcee with $700 a month alimony, close quote. And she was in need of some help with her drinking problem. When Dr. Bob introduced her to the group, the men were, quote, only too willing to talk to her after they saw her, close quotes. Sylvia, it turned out, was so pleased with Bob Smith and his friends that she decided to take up residence in Akron. And, quote, this caused great consternation since her presence threatened to disrupt the whole group, close quotes. The wives were not about to leave their men alone in a room with this beautiful temptress. Finally, someone shrewdly suggested to Sylvia that, quote, it would mean a great deal more if she could go back and help in Chicago, close quote, rather than stay in Akron. And this idea immediately appealed to her. Sylvia was summarily escorted to the train station by several members, and she left for the Windy City, much to the relief of Dr. Bob and all of the AA wives in Ohio.
And we have a footnote there. Sylvia Kaufman drank on the way back to Chicago, but did finally quit a few months later. Once sober, she joined forces with Earl Treat, and they became the two most important and active founding members of AA in Chicago. Her story, The Keys of the Kingdom, which makes no mention of these early difficulties in Ohio, appears in the second, third, and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous, in parentheses, starting on pages 304, 304, and 268, respectively, end parentheses. 14 years after writing her story, Sylvia wrote a postscript in a January 1969 article in the AA Grapevine entitled, Don't Take Our Word for It. According to member list index cards kept by the Chicago group, Sylvia's date of sobriety was September 13th, 1939, which likely makes her the first woman to achieve permanent long-term sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. She died on October 31st, 1974.
But perhaps the most important and influential opinion on the issue of women in early Akron AA was that of Dr. Bob Smith himself. He was notorious for his distrust of women alcoholics, believing they had no place in AA meetings and wondering if they were even capable of getting sober. When he was first told Sylvia was on her way to Akron, he, quote, threw up his hands and said, "We have never had a woman and will not work on a woman," close quote. But by that time, Sylvia was already on her way. Quote, "He just didn't know how to handle them," close quotes, his son remarked. Confronted with yet another new female prospect, Bob just shook his head and said, quote, "I think I'd better work with the men because the women, I'm not sure. I don't know," close quotes. In his awkward uncertainty, Bob Smith turned new women over to his wife, Anne, and to any of the other wives who could be convinced to shoulder the burden of explaining the program of recovery to their fallen sisters. As Frank Amos so candidly commented in his February 1938 report, quote, "Smith says that men can rarely work satisfactorily with women alcoholics. The sex problem makes it difficult. He, as a physician, can and has helped, but his wife and other wives must handle most of this, for which there is a growing need," close quotes. Of course, the real problem here was the threat of extramarital sex. Bill Wilson, quote, recalled explosions which took place around the out-of-bounds romance and the arrival of alcoholic women at meetings. Whole groups got into uproars and a number of people got drunk, he said. "We trembled for AA's reputation and for its survival," close quote. In Akron, Bob Smith, accepting the denigrating prejudices of his day, acknowledged the fact that, quote, "most of the women came in with the label nymphomaniac," close quote, an attitude that presumed there would just naturally be the lurking danger of sex whenever men and women mixed at AA meetings. This fearful mindset regarding women members was neatly captured in the pithy and pejorative Akron saying, quote, "Under every skirt there is a slip," parentheses, a slip being a return to drinking. The prevailing attitude was, "Beware of these women. They are dangerous to your sobriety." To put it bluntly, men who regularly drank to excess were alcoholics, but women who did so were sluts.
The
And
New
we have
York,
a footnote.
oh, beg your pardon. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, we have a footnote there. Can I read that first?
You can indeed.
Okay. As the endnotes attest, most of the foregoing information on the experience of women in early AA comes from just a few pages of Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, highlighting one of the most glaring gaps in our current understanding of the early years of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is criminal that there is still no serious and insightful study based on thorough research among primary documents to tell the story of women's fight for acceptance in AA from 1935 to 1945. This is a truly important story, Harry, and one can only hope that someday an able historian will be able to take on as a doctoral dissertation or a full-blown book writing project. It is desperately needed. Thank you.
And we are reading the footnotes in this chapter. You might have noticed we don't do them in all the chapters this time around. There's 416 of them, and there's 1,500 endnotes. The New York group accepts Florence Rankin, and we're over to the author, Bill Sheberg.
Thank you, David. We have no direct contemporary information on the treatment of women in the early New York meetings, but the ready acceptance of Florence Rankin, despite all her repeated slips, does provide evidence for Bill Wilson's more inclusive approach to membership in the group. It is unlikely her inclusion came without its share of problems, but Florence was extended at least the same sort of tolerance accepted, given, however grudgingly, to the militant atheist Jim Burwell. Both the women and the atheists were in one way or another seriously out of step with the rest of the group, but they were admitted to their meetings nonetheless. As was typical in Akron, it was the wife, Lois Wilson, who made the first AA contact with Florence, having been brought to her hospital bed by Rankin's ex-husband, Larry, parenthesis, one of Bill's old drinking companions from his Wall Street days, close parenthesis. When Florence was released, Lois took her home and introduced her to Bill, who seems to have had no problem working directly with this new member. After a few days, Florence was sent out of town to live with another recently recovered alcoholic, and his wife, presumably because of Wilson's household in Brooklyn, was overrun with single males who were trying to stay sober and didn't need the distraction of this woman's presence. Regarding the difference in the level of acceptance in New York and Akron, it is instructive to note that the only story by an Ohio woman appearing in the first edition of the Big Book, parenthesis, An Alcoholic's Wife, close parenthesis, was less than 2 full pages and was written by Marie Bray, the wife of an alcoholic. In New York, Florence noted that she was, quote unquote, the only lady alcoholic in our particular section, wrote a full-length story, more than 8 pages long, entitled, quote, A Feminine Victory, recounting the details of her drinking career and her long succession of slips before going on to celebrate the turnaround that resulted in her first full year of sobriety. Finally, Bill Wilson's inclusion of Florence's story in the book was a clear invitation to women everywhere, announcing they would be welcome in Alcoholics Anonymous if they truly wanted to solve their drinking problem. The second factor having a profound effect to the writing to the wives was the fact that despite the deliberate fiction that it was the work of a non-alcoholic, to the non-alcoholics, quote unquote, wives of alcoholics, the chapter was entirely written by Bill Wilson, an alcoholic man.
Bill Wilson denies Lois's request to write the chapter.
There are numerous citations on the internet and elsewhere in print claiming the Akron archive contains evidence that Marie Bray, the wife of the Akron AA member Walter Bray, wrote a preliminary draft to 2 wives, or at least lent a hand in the writing of that chapter. However, a recent thorough search of the Akron archives produced no such evidence, nor was the existence of any such evidence known to the longtime archivist who was responsible for creating that collection. It can only be presumed that this bit of bad information grew out of someone's misunderstanding of the fact that Marie Bray did actually write a chapter entitled An Alcoholic's Wife for the story section of the book. In parentheses, this was the same story chapter Bill had offered to Ann Smith the previous June, but she had declined to write.
We have a footnote right there. Thank you. See the footnote on page 190 of this book for the previous discussion of the fact that Bill Wilson never asked Ann Smith to write 2 wives. Thank you.
Lois was probably aware Bill had offered Ann Smith the opportunity to write one of the full-length stories for the back of the book, and that Ann had refused him. But Lois was not as modest or retiring as Ann Smith. In the almost 4 years that Bill had been sober, she, quote, had begun to realize how distorted the relationships in families of alcoholics could often be, how important it was for families to understand about alcoholism and to rearrange their thinking, close quote. Given all of that, Lois thought writing this chapter was, quote, something she was much better qualified to do, end quote, than her husband. So what could be more logical than to assume that Bill would offer her the opportunity to put all of this hard-won knowledge to good use by writing 2 wives for his book? But that was an offer Wilson was not willing to make. According to Lois, when she, quote unquote, shyly suggested to Bill that she should write this chapter and perhaps also the family afterward, he answered with a firm no, telling her, quote, he thought the book, except for the stories, should all be written in the same style. This is an interesting excuse and one we shall see Wilson use again later, but it is more than a little self-serving, reflecting Bill's growing sense of ownership and control of the book project as each of the newly finished chapters began to pile up. However, Bill's reasons for not wanting Lois to write the chapter were, in all likelihood, a bit more complex than this simple-sounding desire for uniformity in style or even his own control issues. For one thing, as he wrote more of the book, Wilson came to appreciate just how difficult it was to write accurately and clearly about the alcoholic condition, and to wives would surely have to address several of these sensitive and complicated questions, not least of which was, quote, what is an alcoholic, end quote. Given that reality, Bill was unwilling to delegate this challenging task to a non-alcoholic, fearing they would almost certainly get the tone wrong, or at least offer some unacceptable explanation of alcoholism, or some wrong advice on how to handle certain delicate situations involving the newly recovered man. In fact, Bill would once more wrestle with trying to produce an accurate definition of the alcoholic in this chapter. But it was most likely this last point, the way to properly deal with a newly recovered man, that was decisive in his refusal to turn this project over to Lois. As Francis Hartigan noted in his book, his 2001 book, Bill W., in all things, Bill Wilson was first and foremost an advocate for the still suffering alcoholic. It is hard to appreciate today the tentativeness of the early sobriety of the typically middle-aged, late-stage alcoholics he was familiar with. As heartless as it might seem from the wife's point of view, to ask her to continue to treat her husband as a fragile child, or if it could buy him precious time to achieve some degree of emotional stability before her long bottled-up resentments boiled over, it was something that Bill would do. And that is just what he did in this chapter, constantly stressing the major concessions the wife must make to support the new man's still tenuous sobriety, while simultaneously absolving the drinking husband from substantive responsibilities for his actions. One could hardly count on the long-suffering wife to see the issue from this more permissive and forgiving perspective. Still, Lois felt she was more qualified than anyone else to write this chapter, and she might well have been. But if she had done so, quote, it is quite likely that the content would have been different, end quote. An understatement indeed.
Finally, there is the worrisome problem of the marital discord that might arise if Bill was forced to severely edit something Lois had written so that it conformed to the perspective he wanted to see presented in this chapter. Avoidance is a common tactic in many marriages, and this likely figured in Wilson's decision to sidestep the potentially explosive minefield by simply writing the chapter himself. Saying no is a single argument. Ongoing edits and corrections might have resulted in more disagreements than Bill Wilson was willing to contemplate or tolerate. Lois was furious at being treated so dismissively. Quote, I was mad, she said, adding that, quote, I wasn't so much mad as hurt. I still don't know why Bill wrote it. I've never really gotten into why he insisted upon writing it, end quote. Years later, when she was questioned on this again, it was still a sensitive topic, one that continued to rankle. Quote, I don't think I've ever gotten over it, she said. It still makes me mad just to think about it.
And we have a footnote to that. I would suggest that the sentiments in this paragraph, in parentheses, I still don't know why Bill wrote it, and I don't think I've ever gotten over it, in parentheses, provide some interesting insights into the Wilsons' marriage in relation to the levels of communication that prevailed there and to the resentments that obviously remained unresolved for decades.
Given all of the above cultural biases and the short but stormy history of women in early AA, along with the fact that To Wives was written by a man masquerading as a woman, it is hardly surprising to find that this chapter contains the most patriarchal writing to be found in the Big Book.
Bill Wilson speaks for the wives. Bill Wilson opens the chapter with an acknowledgement that, quote, thus far our book has spoken of men, end quote, but he notes, quote, what we have said applies quite as much to women, end quote, that, quote, our activities on behalf of women who drink are on the increase, end quote, and that, quote, there is every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men if they follow our suggestions, end quote. So clearly women are welcome in Alcoholics Anonymous, and the principles of the program are just as valid for them as they are for any of their male counterparts. Having given this scant but important bit of recognition to female drinkers, Wilson notes that the ravages of alcoholism affect many family members, but especially impact the wife. There is, however, reason for hope because
among us are wives whose problems has been solved.
Bill then concludes his 3 introductory paragraphs with a deliberately deceptive promise.
We shall let the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous address the wives of men who drink too much. What they say will apply to nearly everyone bound by ties of blood or affection to an alcoholic.
And so, with a double space and 4 short dashed lines to indicate a change of speaker, Bill Wilson begins his impersonification of the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous, women who, in one uniform voice, will deliver the message he considers so important for a wife of a drinking man to hear and heed. Borrowing from the powerful and proven one drunk talking to another drunk model, this section opens by saying,
as wives of Alcoholics Anonymous, we want you to sense that we understand you as perhaps few can. And we want to leave you with the feeling that no situation is too difficult and no unhappiness too great to be overcome.
This hopeful promise is followed by an attempt to generate some immediate sister feeling by offering a few likely shared experiences.
We have traveled a rocky road. There is no mistake about that. We have had long rendezvous with hurt pride, frustration, self-pity, misunderstand and fear. These are not pleasant companions. We have been driven to maudlin sympathy, to bitter resentment. We have veered from extreme to extreme, ever hoping that one day our loved ones would be themselves once more.
Shifting from these common problems to some shared but failed solutions, the wives now present a sympathetic catalogue of the ways they have unsuccessfully tried to deal with their drunken husbands. Parenthesis states so similar to Wilson's laundry list of methods tried by alcoholics who want to quit drinking.
We have been unselfish and self-sacrificing. We have told innumerable lies to protect our pride and our husbands' reputations. We have prayed, we have begged, we have been patient, we have struck out viciously, we have run away, we've been hysterical, we've been terror-stricken, we have sought sympathy, we have had retaliatory love affairs with other men.
Acknowledging the complete failure of these tactics, quote, the wives, end quote, now present 6 paragraphs elaborating the many troubles often caused by drunken husbands.
Parentheses, our homes have been battlegrounds. We seldom had friends in our homes. There was never financial security. Sometimes there were other women, the bill collectors, the sheriffs. They struck the children, close parentheses.
This is followed by 2 paragraphs relating more possible solutions to these seemingly insoluble problems.
Perhaps we got a divorce or finally sought employment ourselves, or we began to ask medical advice.
Now, laying the groundwork for the coming AA solution, quote, the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous freely admit that
under these conditions, we naturally made some mistakes.
And then present several paragraphs detailing the confusion and bafflement they felt when confronted with the mystery of their husband's illness. They agree this mystery must be acknowledged, but if you honestly want him to recover,
don't condemn your alcoholic husband no matter what he says or does. He's just another very sick, unreasonable person. Treat him when you can as though he had pneumonia. When he angers you, remember that he is very ill.
This admonition for understanding, forgiveness, and acceptance sets the tone for much of what follows. The basic message to the wife will be that she must do everything in her power to help her husband get sober, no matter how unfair or unreasonable that may seem to her at the time. This is not going to be a presentation of how the wife can best take care of herself, but rather a set of instructions on what must be done if she really wants her husband to quit drinking forever. Here, Bill's presentation once again follows the outline Hank had created the previous June, where he suggested a chapter, quote, dealing with wives, relatives, and friends, showing them how they may help, close quote. This chapter is not going to be about how they may survive. It's about how they may help. However, there is one situation that overrides this general rule of forgiveness and tolerance that the quote-unquote wives want to note before concluding this section.
There is an important exception to the foregoing, they write. We realize some men are thoroughly bad-intentioned, that no amount of patience will make any difference.
The wife is told that if her husband is like this,
don't let him get away with it.
And take whatever measures are required to save yourself and your children from further misery, if necessary, even by leaving him.
Dealing with the 4 types of alcoholics.
In contrast to the 3 different types of alcoholics Bill had already offered, and there is a solution, parenthesis, the moderate drinker, the hard drinker, and the real alcoholic, close parenthesis, the wives now confidently claim that the problem with which you struggle usually falls within one of 4 categories, and they provide a detailed outline for each of these 4 types.
1. Your husband may be only a heavy drinker. His drinking may be constant, or it may be heavy only on certain occasions. Sometimes he's a source of embarrassment to you and his friends. He is positive he can handle his liquor, that it does him no harm. 2. Your husband is showing lack of control. He is unable to stay on the water wagon even when he wants to. He is remorseful after serious drinking bouts and tells you he wants to stop. But when he gets over the spree, he begins to think once more how he can drink moderately next time. He has begun to try, with or without your cooperation, various means of moderating or staying dry. 3. This husband has gone much further than husband number 2, and the weary round of sanitariums and hospitals has begun. He admits he cannot drink like other people, but does not see why. He clings to the notion that he will yet find a way to do so. He may have come to the point where he desperately wants to stop, but cannot. 4. He has been placed in one institution after another. He is violent or definitely insane when drunk. Sometimes he drinks on the way home from the hospital. Perhaps he has had delirium tremens. Doctors shake their heads and advise you to have him committed. Maybe you have already been obliged to put him away.
The critical difference between these 4 types is the degree to which the drinker is willing to quit. The first is still positive he can handle his liquor. The second, driven by increasing problems, continues to tell you he wants to stop. The third desperately wants to stop but cannot, while the fourth has given up all hope of ever quitting. He's the one who drinks on the way home from the hospital. With this neat outline in place, the next 16 paragraphs advise the drinker's wife on what she can expect, depending on which of these 4 categories her husband falls into, and what action she should take to be helpful to him. In each case, the actions suggested for setting the drunken husband on the road to recovery rely almost exclusively on readings from the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. The wives are confident that the book will prove to have all the information necessary for transforming an active drinker into a sober member of AA. Half of these paragraphs concentrate on husband number 1 because, quote, oddly enough, end quote, he is often the most difficult to deal with. Confronted with this kind of drunk, quote, the principle of success is that you should never be angry, end quote. End quote. The next rule is that you should never tell him what to do about his drinking, end quote. Unless these 2 rules are strictly followed, your husband will likely consider you as nothing but, quote, a nag and a killjoy, end quote. And then he will use that characterization as an excuse for more drinking, during which time he, quote, may seek someone to console him, not always another man, end quote. With this devastating threat hanging over her head, the wife is encouraged to initiate a, quote, frank and friendly talk about his liquor problem, end quote, with her husband, but, quote, be sure you are not critical during such a discussion. Attempt instead to put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical, end quote. And when discussion does arise, you might suggest he read this book, or at least the chapter on alcoholism, end quote. This is followed by the rather strange suggestion that it might be helpful at this point to take the focus off the husband and put it on some of his drinking friends. Once the quote unquote number one husband has gained some understanding of alcoholism, parenthesis, from his wife and from reading the book, close parenthesis, then he might be willing, because, quote, drinkers like to help other drinkers, end quote, to take an interest in some of his alcoholic acquaintances and even, quote, be willing to talk one of them, perhaps over a highball, about his drinking problem. Parenthesis, exactly how this bizarre recommendation might move the husband closer to sobriety is never clarified. Close parenthesis. If the controversial gambit fails, quote, drop the subject for a time and wait for him to bring the book up again, something he will usually do. In the meantime, while waiting for him to revive the topic himself, quote, you might try to, end quote, redirect his efforts and, quote, help the wife of another serious drinker, end quote. When dealing with a second type of alcoholic husband, quote, the same principles which apply to husband number one should be practiced, end quote. In addition, it is suggested that after his next binge, you, quote, ask him if he would really like to get over drinking for good. Do not ask that he do it for you or anyone else, just would he like to, end quote. If he replies positively, quote, the wives, end quote, recommend an even stronger focus on the book, with the ever helpful wife carefully pointing out some of the most salient insights for her husband's consideration. If this does not produce the desired results, they recommend just leaving him alone for a while. Quote, the seed's been planted in his mind, and now he knows that over 100 men, much like himself, have recovered. Sooner or later, he will likely to find him reading the book once more. Quote, if you have a number three husband, you may be in luck. Being certain he wants to stop, you can go to him with this volume as joyfully as you would as though you had struck oil. But if your husband does not respond favorably, then, quote, cheerfully see him through more sprees. Talk about his condition or this book only when he raises the issue. In some cases, it may be better to let the family doctor present the book. The doctor can urge action without arousing hostility, end quote. Men in the fourth category may seem quite hopeless, but that is not so. Many of Alcoholics Anonymous were like that. And although everyone had given up on them and, quote, defeat seems certain, often such men may have spectacular and powerful recoveries, end quote. If the reader's husband is one of these, and if he is currently committed somewhere, then she is told to show him this book and then consult with his doctor about the possibility of him giving his program an honest try. If her husband, quote, can convince you and your doctor that he means business, you should give him a chance to try our method, unless the doctor thinks his mental condition abnormal or dangerous, end quote. In a strong note of positive reassurance, the wives then relate the story of 4 men confined to a state institution who were recently given just this kind of chance to, quote, try our method, end quote, and only one of them has returned to the hospital. Quote, the others have no relapse at all. The power of God goes deep, end quote. If the husband is not currently confined, but should be because he is, quote unquote, too dangerous to himself and to others, quote, we think the kind thing is to lock him up, end quote. The women follow this sad admission with a paragraph on the harsh realities of such commitments, the product of some real-life experiences with such situations.
As a rule, an institution is a dismal place, and sometimes it is not conducive to recovery. It is a pity that chronic alcoholics must often mingle with the insane. Someday, we hope our group will be instrumental in changing this condition. Many of our husbands spent weary years in institutions. Though more reluctant than most people to place our men there, we sometimes suggest that it be done. Of course, a good doctor should always be consulted.
The benefits for wives.
Now the wives dramatically shift the focus from the husband to the wife herself, extolling the benefits she can gain by following the suggestions found in the book. With this new understanding of her husband and the nature of his illness, she is now better equipped to deal with neighbors and friends.
Explain to such people that he is a sick person.
With his children,
The same principle applies. Use your energies to promote a better understanding all around.
and with his employer.
Let your husband explain. Your desire to protect him should not cause you to lie to people.
Should this last tactic result in the husband losing his job, the wife should, quote,
Regard it in a different light. Maybe it will prove a blessing. Time after time, this apparent calamity has been a boon to us, for it opened up a path which led to the discovery of God. End quote.
This final line serves as an opening for the wives to expand upon the further benefits that a careful reading of the book can provide, even if her husband doesn't quit drinking. After all, the general ideas of a quote unquote much better life can be had if only it is, quote, lived on a spiritual plane, applies just as much to the wife as it does to the husband. Jim?
Oh, if God can solve the age-old riddle of alcoholism, he can solve your problems too. We wives found that, like everyone else, we were afflicted with pride, self-pity, vanity, and all the things which go to make up the self-centered person. And we were not above selfishness or dishonesty. As our husbands began to apply spiritual principles in their lives, we began to see the desirability of doing so too.
The wives point out that the major stumbling block for many of us who found ourselves in this situation was that at first we
did not believe that we needed this help. We thought on the whole we were pretty good women, but it was a silly idea that we were too good to need God. Now we try to put spiritual principles to work in every department of our lives. When we do that, we find it solves our problems too.
If both you and your husband do put these principles into practice, they advise, you are quote unquote going to be happy. But that does not mean all of your problems will disappear overnight. On the contrary, you are entering a phase where quote unquote growth has just begun and where
there will be ups and downs. Many of the old problems will still be with you, but a better way of life will emerge when they are overcome. However, throughout this period of adjustment, you must not expect too much of your husband. His ways of thinking and doing are the habits of years. Patience, tolerance, and understanding and love are your watchwords. Show him these things in yourself, and they will be reflected back to you from him. Live and let live is the rule. If you both show a willingness to remedy your own defects, there will be little need to criticize each other.
Lessons learned the hard way.
Moving toward their conclusion, the wives now mention two things that frequently cause conflict in the home after a man has quit drinking. First of all, there is the likely
resentment that love and loyalty could not cure our husbands of alcoholism.
And second,
you may become jealous of the attention he bestows on other people, especially alcoholics.
Regarding the first,
when resentful thoughts come, pause and count your blessings. After all, your family is reunited. Alcohol is no longer a problem.
In relation to the second complaint, remember,
he must work with other people to maintain his own sobriety. And it is a real mistake if you dampen his enthusiasm for alcoholic work.
But
if you cooperate rather than complain, you will find that his excess enthusiasm will tone down.
One final thing would surely bother the long-suffering wife is if her husband came home drunk some night. If he owns his mistake in picking up the first drink and is aware that
he must redouble his spiritual activities if he expects to survive, you need not remind him of his spiritual deficiency. He will know of it. Cheer him up and ask him how you can be more helpful.
Approaching the end of the chapter, the wives have just a few important final points that they would like to emphasize for the benefit of the woman who struggles with an alcoholic husband.
Even your hatred must go. The slightest sign of fear or intolerance will lessen your husband's chance of recovery. In a weak moment, he may take your dislike of his high-stepping friends as one of those insanely trivial excuses to drink. Never, never try to arrange his life so as to shield him from temptation. The slightest disposition on your part to guide his appointments or his affairs so he will not be tempted will be noticed. Make him feel absolutely free to come and go as he likes. This is important. If he gets drunk, don't blame yourself. God has either removed your husband's liquor problem or he has not. If not, it had better be found out right away. Then you and your husband can get right down to fundamentals. If a repetition is to be prevented, place the problem along with everything else in God's hands.
Acknowledging that much of the foregoing may have sounded rather strident, the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous try to soften these blows by closing on a conciliatory note.
We realize we've been giving you much direction and advice. We may have seemed preachy. If that is so, we're sorry, for we ourselves don't care for people who preach. But what we have related is based upon experience, some of it painful. We had to learn these things the hard way. That is why we are anxious that you understand, that you avoid these unnecessary difficulties.
And the wives close by saying to the other wives out there who may soon be with them,
good luck and God bless you.
Wives' culpability.
To wives is a mixed and jumbled bag filled with, quote, much direction and advice, end quote, but the overall message to the wife is clear. Although both God and your husband share some responsibility in the matter, the heaviest burden of responsibility for whether or not your husband will ever quit drinking rests squarely with you, the wife of the alcoholic. After carefully reading this chapter, one might reasonably conclude that the unhelpful wife is the cause of most slips. And Wilson's response to this has been fairly summarized as a collection of demands requiring the wife to continue to treat your husband as a fragile child if she wants him to stay sober. In addition, as the wife struggles to make the best of this bad situation and to follow, quote, the directions and advice, end quote, offered in this chapter, the drinking husband is largely exempted from any of the consequences caused by his drinking escapades. Speaking to the wives, Bill suggests there are many ways for the wife to be helpful under these circumstances, all of which include a heavy emphasis on the virtue of patience, tolerance, understanding, and love, and take the slogan, live and let live, as a rule. But he says that there are many more ways in which the wife's wrong actions can cause her husband to drink, and these must be avoided at all cost. He advises,
Don't try to reform your husband.
Don't
Don't
complain
complain
about
about
your
your husband.
Don't condemn your husband.
Don't be critical of your husband.
Don't be resentful of your husband.
Don't question your husband.
Don't argue with your husband.
Don't be angry with your husband.
Don't embarrass your husband.
Don't lecture your husband.
Thank you.
and finally, never, never tell your husband what to do. He contends that failure in any one of these areas will likely give him, quote, one of those insanely trivial excuses to drink, and then it will be your fault that he goes out drinking again. The overall perspective of the wife's proper place in a marriage and the heavy responsibility she supposedly bears for her mate's drinking is certainly the most striking feature of the chapter. That such an outlook on marriage was so confidently offered by the writer, parenthesis, and so readily approved by his male cohorts in Alcoholics Anonymous, close parenthesis, tells us more about Bill Wilson and the state of marital relationships in middle-class America in the late 1930s than it does about the best ways for a wife to be helpful keeping her husband sober. It also provides a stark insight into just how desperately Bill wanted the new man to stay sober, even to the point of casually and comfortably foisting this huge burden of guilt off onto the wife should her husband ever go back to drinking. Fortunately, the Al-Anon family groups were officially organized 13 years after this chapter was written, providing a much-needed counterbalance. Founded as an independent group of partners, relatives, and friends of alcoholics, It promotes a much more reasonable approach to marital relations than the one presented here. While suggesting numerous ways to be helpful when dealing with a troubled partner, friend, or relative, Al-Anon's emphasis is more firmly placed on the benefits that a 12-step program can offer to the suffering non-alcoholic, even while he or she continues trying to help the alcoholics in their life. Beyond Wilson's gross overestimate of the wife's culpability in her husband's drinking, there are two other notable features in Two Wives worthy of mention.
Further defining the alcoholic.
The first of these is Bill's attempt once again to provide a definitive description of the alcoholic. His earliest try in There is a Solution offered three types of drinkers. The moderate drinker is briefly described there as having, quote, little trouble giving up liquor entirely. He can take it or leave it, end quote. The hard drinker gets a longer paragraph, noting that he suffers more from his drinking than the moderate drinker, but with the proper negative motivation, such a man, quote, can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome, end quote. However, the real alcoholic, who is presented in a detailed page-long paragraph, has lost, quote, all power of his liquor consumption, and he is always more or less insanely drunk, end quote, and gradually deteriorates until he, quote, begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums, end quote. Bill admits this portrayal, quote, is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, but this description should identify him roughly, end quote. In Two Wives, Wilson revisits this thorny problem of formulating an accurate definition of the alcoholic and attempts to supply a more comprehensive picture in 4 long paragraphs, each of which details a different category of men who suffer from too much drinking. While the earlier distinctions centered on whether or not the 3 types could give up drinking, these 4 new categories reformulate the question, asking whether the problem drinker really wants to quit, and if so, just how badly does he want to do that? In the intervening months, Bill seems to have concluded that intention, rather than actual behavior, might be the best way to make fruitful distinctions between the different types of drinkers. Men in the first category here have no intention of stopping. Those in the second definitely want to stop. The third group includes drinkers who desperately want to stop but cannot. And the fourth is made up of men who, no matter how willing they might be, have despaired of ever quitting and are now hopelessly confined to an institution. This shift is subtle, but it resonated with Wilson, and he continued to find it useful in explaining his understanding of the best path to sobriety from this point forward. For instance, in March 1941, when he published the appendix entitled Spiritual Experience in the second printing of the Big Book, the element of quote-unquote willingness was identified as one of the 3 essential and indispensable factors necessary for recovery.
And we have a footnote there. That's Alcoholics Anonymous 4th edition on pages 567 and 568. The other 2 elements are honesty and open-mindedness.
But for all of Bill's effort, these new categories are still far from a comprehensive definition of the alcoholic, and they clearly lack any of the scientific criteria that the medical and psychiatric professions demand as a valid diagnostic tool. Later AAs, recognizing this ongoing lack of a precise, accurate definition for alcoholism, have been heard to neatly sidestep the issue by noting that alcoholism is a disease that can only be successfully diagnosed by the patient. It is an interesting and helpful reformulation of the problem.
The book as the solution.
Another notable feature in this chapter is the complete reliance on the book Alcoholics Anonymous as the only lifeline offered to these wives and husbands struggling with the drink problem. The faith of the quote-unquote wives of Alcoholics Anonymous have in the power of the book is almost boundless, and in this and this alone that they offer as a beacon of hope to the hard-pressed women they are addressing.
And there's another footnote. To help husband number one, quote, you might suggest he read this book, or at least the chapter on alcoholism, end quote. Husband number two is to be offered a more vigorous introduction to the book. Quote, show him your copy of this book and tell him what you have found out about alcoholism. Show him that the writers of the book understand as only alcoholics can, end quote. Tell him some of the interesting stories you've read and ask him to look at the chapter on alcoholism. End quote. For husband number three, in parentheses, he wants to quit, but he cannot. It is suggested that you, quote, go to him with this volume as joyfully as though you had struck oil. He may not share your enthusiasm, but he is practically sure to read the book, end quote. If not, perhaps his doctor could convince him to do so. Finally, for the institutionalized husband, wives are advised to, quote, see that your husband gets this book, end quote, and that you, quote, give him a chance to try out the method, end quote, but only if you and his doctor are convinced, quote, he means business, end quote.
The exclusive emphasis on the book may seem odd at first, but this one solution fits all approach is understandable when seen in the context in which the chapter was written. It must be remembered that in October 1938, there were no AA hospitals, no AA missionaries, no other AA literature, no treatment facilities of any kind preaching a program of recovery, no other local sober men, and most importantly, just 2 AA meetings being held weekly in the entire country. The only thing a woman reading this book had to rely on was the book itself. There were simply no other support mechanisms in place at this time. The book is either going to carry the message of recovery to a suffering alcoholic all by itself, or it would not. It was the only available option at this time for saving the still suffering alcoholic.
Thank you very much. That's the end of chapter 18 to wives. And you can unmute yourself, participants. Thank you very much.
Bill, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, readers.
All,
That
Bill,
was
for
excellent.
writing,
Good
all
work.
readers,
Thank you
Dave,
so much,
Thank you
readers.
so much.
Yeah, and footnotes,
you.
excellent. I'm glad we did the footnotes. Thank you.
No, not bad. Thank you, everyone. We felt it was essential to go. We'd love to do more again, wouldn't we, Bill? Maybe next time we'll do more, Bill Wilson or Bill Sherbrooke. We'll do all the footnotes next time we do it, Bill Sherbrooke. So, can he hear me? I don't think he can hear me. He's giving me the deaf ear.
Selective hearing loss.
He definitely can. Let's go. I want to hear what you, Bill. I really do want to hear what you have to say most of all the time, but definitely this time. What have you got for us, Bill?
Well, a couple of things jumped out at me right near the end. What really caught my attention was this diagnosis. It could be alcoholism is a disease that can only be successfully diagnosed by the patient. My sponsor told me that when I was about 9 months sober, and you could have knocked me off the chair with a feather when he said that. I was like, I mean, it just made so much sense to me because we've been trying to get some people sober. You know, we had a real robust beginners group at the Stratford Men's Group. In those days, there was 20 to 40 guys in that room with less than 3 months or 6 months of sobriety. And but it could only be successfully diagnosed by the patient himself. It was just like, man, that just blew me away. That really did. I don't know. This is painful, you know. It's a freaking horrible chapter. It's just, you know, it's hard to see the forest. There's some great forest here. There really is. There's some hard to see the forest for some of the ugly, ugly trees here. I mean, it's patriarchal and it's even misogynistic. And you know, I don't know. It just struck me again about, you know, I mean, I have a hard time with it. I can't imagine how a newcomer woman must react to this thing, but I don't want to get into that blah, 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 anyhow. And I love to talk about boy meets girl on AA campus because that's my story. I met the lady Sarah when she was 6.5 days sober and had to stay away. That meant I had to stay away from her for 359 days. But after 359 days, I kissed her for the first time. We've been together ever since, which is over 39 years. We're going to be 40 years in November. So anyhow, it's not that it doesn't work sometimes, because it does work sometimes. And I think there's other people on this meeting who would attest to that. So
I want to go to Jim Morley next, but I want to come back to you, Mr. Sherburne, in a minute on context. But let's go to Jim.
Me? Well, yeah, it's an interesting chapter. It's a chapter that my guess that although people talk about 164 pages, lots of people don't read this one. And the ones that do don't know that Bill wrote it. And I mean, I've run into that. I've had that situation. But what do you mean Lois didn't write this? What do you mean Bill wrote this? But it says here, we the wives of alcoholics.
Sorry, Jim, got it.
And so, yeah. And the other thing is, I don't know if in all my presentations, but I talk about presentism. And, in the study of history, keeping our current mores and beliefs and, away from the study of history is sometimes very difficult, particularly if we don't believe in those things that people did in history, and so trying to keep an objective view of a story like this is difficult. I think it was handled very well right from the beginning of this chapter. And I think I posted something the other day about, William White had a good quote about, it had only been a few years that the women had the vote. And it talks about a lot of other things, but sometimes it's hard to keep an objective view of history when we look back and we see things we don't like. However, depending on what you believe, there are still a lot of people who believe that, we ought to go back to 1935 and keep them barefoot and pregnant. I mean, people are still that way, unfortunately. But anyway, we avoid politics and ideologies and those kinds of things. The other thing that I noticed right away was a lot of talks. Bill mentions in the chapter that there's very little real information except from Dr. Bob and the good old timers about early AA. And first of all, let me explain. That's probably the first book about AA history that I read. I loved it. I memorized bits of it. Dr. Bob was my hero. I love the book. I love the anecdotal parts of it. But it was a book that was written 40 years after the fact. And, interviewing people about what happened to them 35 and 40 years ago. And there's very little archival information in it. And because there just wasn't at the time that it was written. So it's a great book and I love it. And it's anecdotal. And some of the anecdotes I don't like and some of them I do. But it's a great book, but it needs to be taken again contemporaneously. And it certainly is nothing like writing the big book based on primary documents and deep research and footnotes and endnotes, and nothing like that is in that book. But it's good for what it is. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Before we go to Dave, who's waiting there, Bill, can I just ask you a little bit about context? Because Jim said about presentism. I've heard Jim talk a lot about that in his presentations. I put in the chat what presentism. I just put up on. Bill Sherburne, I just want to read this to you. So, presentism, that tendency to interpret past events through the lens of current values and beliefs. Bill, so where does the context of this chapter go? Because we're trying to read it from 1930s patriarchal. Wilson done a great job, did he not? In context.
Well, I don't know that you wanted to say a great job, David, but I mean, what he did was completely understandable and just taken for granted at the time. It's like this whole presentism thing that Jim mentions is really a big deal when you're trying to pay attention to the reality of the past, you know? I mean, Thomas Jefferson writes all men are created equal, and he's running a slave plantation. You know, come on, give me a break. So where are we going with that? Does that mean that the Declaration of Independence is a piece of crap because it was written by a slaveholder? You know, Jesus doesn't mention slaves in the New Testament, but the Jews still had slaves at that point. I mean, it was, you all through the Old Testament, there's slaves, so what's going on with that? There's also a bunch of multiple wife situations in the Old Testament. So, you just, our morality, this is a big argument. I've read 4 books on morals and ethics in the last year, but our morality is, in my opinion, is an evolving thing. It's just changing all the time, and you have to understand the context in which it goes. You can't just take today's moral values and stick them on Thomas Jefferson or on Bill Wilson here. You just can't do that. You gotta cut those people. I don't want to say you got to cut them slack. It's because it sounds like we're just letting people off the hook. We're not talking about letting people off the hook. We're just talking about things in context. I come back to Ernie Kurtz beating me up the side of the head with a 2x4 every time I talk to him. Context, 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 context. And it's messy. It's messy, man. And if you want just a nice, neat, Tiffany box with a bow on it, then okay, you can have that, but that's really not reality. It's not reality. It's not reality with a small r. It's not reality with a capital R. So I get a little testy about people who are taking present morality and packaging it in the past. You can do that. I think it's important to realize that Jefferson, who writes all men are created equal, was a slaveholder and kept promising through his whole life he was going to free the slaves, and he never did. He couldn't afford to do that. But that, it's just, so am I cutting Jefferson's slack there? No, it's just realizing the fact of what was going on, what the economics were at those times, what the morality was in the culture and that he grew out of, that he lived in. It was just, we were just on the cusp of deciding that slavery was totally bad and we should get rid of it under all circumstances and all things. The English had just banned slave. Anyhow, I don't want to get into that too deep, but you gotta take 3 steps back. You can't just be up close and personal with this thing and bring in your present value system to these things. You've got to be looking at them in context. Context, context, context. Now, I probably said something that'll crucify me here, because I do that all the time when I'm extemporizing, but sorry.
Not at all. Thank you, Bill Sherbuck and Jim Worley. And Dave, thanks for waiting. You're up, Jim, or Dave, beg your pardon.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. And Jim, I've been a big fan. I've been following you I've been liking you on Facebook for quite a while now. And just for a record, I'm in Los Angeles, and when we start this chapter in a book study, we just start by saying, whatever you do, don't show this chapter to your wife. And then we start reading it. But the question I've had, and the opportunity to talk to you, is on page 14. It says, the wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves. Sounds very self-serving and very, why do you look at me? But in the first edition, it was not more than men themselves, but not less than the men themselves. Do you have any idea why that was changed, or the reasoning behind changing that?
The fact that something like that was changed is news to me. So obviously I have no opinion on it. Jim?
Exactly. What was the quote?
Well, on page 14, it says, the wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves. But in the first edition, it says not less than the men themselves. And while mathematically, it's the same.
Yeah,
but the tone is really different.
Okay,
that's been brought up before, and I had some answer, but I don't know of any reason that Bill Wilson explained as to why the change was made. And so the rest would be speculation. And unless the author tells you why he wrote something some way, there's no way of knowing. And I don't, but I remember that question coming up before. And I don't know of Bill saying, hey, I changed that word because of such and such. Yeah. So I don't know either. So. Yeah.
And I'll put Jim's details in the chat if you want, Dave G, if you want to contact Dave or Bill Schaberg, I'll put their emails in the chat for you. Thanks very much. Going to Robert J.
Yes. My name is Robert. I'm an alcoholic. Good reading, Bill. I have a hard time with this chapter. Great reading. I use this chapter for my dad. Would that be okay? Because I put my dad through hell.
Robert, I think anything that works, we should be doing. That's the deal. And if this is something that can fruitfully repair your relationship with your father by taking a perspective of the things that are happening here, then yeah, we want to be doing that. One thing we know about AA is it's pragmatic. If it works, we're all good for it. That's the deal. We're not going to get in the weed with dogma that well, it works, but it contradicts some sort of belief system we all have to sign off on. That is not the case in AA. So if that's working for you, I'm voting for it.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to Gigi. Thanks for reading today, Gigi.
Thank you, David. Thank you for asking me. And thank you to everyone else, too. So when it comes to presentism, I often wonder what our current practices are that are going to be seen as really heinous in the future.
Yeah.
We have to really, we don't have any way of knowing that, do we? But I'm really wondering, and I've always wondered this, does this actually work for anyone? Say, for example, did it work for husbands who were married to alcoholic wives? Did these suggestions actually work for the women who are married to alcoholics?
Don't know, Gigi. Again, it's the kind of thing that Jim was saying. We got nobody writing back and saying, God, that was the greatest chapter in the whole book. That worked for me fabulously. Nobody's written an article in the Grapevine, for instance, along those lines that I know of. So
that was my question. Yeah. Is there any evidence that this was helpful to anyone or not?
No, I think we had to wait for Al-Anon to get some real help here. But
okay.
And the Flying Blind, weren't they? They were only coming out the Flying Blind, Bill Schaberg, weren't they? They were only coming out the Flying Blind period?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were still coming out the Flying Blind. The seeds were only being set.
Right, but I think Gigi's talking about, in the 1940s, was there a bunch of wives that said, that's the best damn chapter. And boy, I am so glad those wives wrote that chapter because it helped me get through blah, blah. No, we've got no testimony along those lines that I know of.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. GG. And the Big Book Slayer is with us, Dina T.
Hey, everybody. I'm Dina Alcoholic. Thank you so much for such a great presentation. And I would like to share my experience as a newcomer reading this chapter in Stay in Presentism. I read this and I was like, I need to take this book home to my husband and let him read this. He really needs to read this. Still not accepting the fact that I'm an alcoholic. My husband needs to do something about it. And, now that I'm in Al-Anon also, it's amazing to hear people talk about their alcoholics in their life. And I said to my sponsor one day, I said, do I need to share with her, a little bit about alcoholism? And my sponsor was like, no, she keeps coming back. That'll be enough. She'll be fine. So thank you so much for letting me share.
Thank you, Dina. And Isel, good to see you, Isel.
Yeah, good to see you too, David. Good to see everyone. And every time I read this chapter, it brings something else out. I know when I first came around, I had a friend who I was associating with quite a bit. And I thought I would pass this chapter on to his wife. She happened to be an infertility specialist. And I just knew she would get a lot out of this. And it didn't help at all, as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, what none of them told me, either one of them told me, is that he was dying from something else. And that was just a family thing. But I knew he and I got high together all the time. And when I came across this chapter, I was so startled, fresh in this information that I quickly ran into her. But what I've come to understand over time is that a person must, and I'm talking about me now, a person must look at themselves and take responsibility for themselves in regards to this information, and particularly since we've found out that the information is not as accurate as we thought it was originally. Because originally you think, oh, this is something one of the wives wrote. And then you find out later on, oh no, Bill Wilson wrote this. And then you find out also that Bill Wilson had some motives outside of the fact that of what he was sharing, because of the sensitivity of the relationship between he and Lois at that time. So I like reading it in this group setting and coming away with something new or something I didn't think of, not necessarily something new, but I do accept it for what it is based on what legitimate information we have. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Isel. Jim, Bill, good. Good stuff. We move on to Meredith. I hope I'm saying that right, Meredith, or it's in Roswell.
Yes, thank you. Meredith, alcoholic. I participate in a lot of book studies, and what I like to get from this is, remember, I'm an alcoholic, and if we read between the lines, we can still see how infantile we are in this chapter, just by how it was written. But what I like is always getting information that can make me more effective. And what I learned today was how the classification of alcoholics was reframed to show the degree of willingness they are to stop. I'd never really isolated that. And that's very interesting to me and helpful. And then the other piece was, to the increasing degree of emphasis is put on the big book for Alcoholic 1, Alcoholic 2, Alcoholic 3, and Alcoholic 4. Those are things I can really use. And I like to stay away from the debates. And I've heard all of this, and I agree with a lot of it, but I always try to find, what can I get from this that tells me about me as the alcoholic? And I appreciate that very much. This has been very insightful for me. Thank you.
Lovely, Meredith. Thank you very much. And we're going to Bobette. He's in Philadelphia.
Hi, Babette, alcoholic. And actually, Gigi captured exactly what I was feeling, but I just want to take it one step further. I don't understand how Lois could read this, or any wife of an alcoholic could read this and follow it. Of course, it's misogynistic. Of course, it's arrogant. It's just so out of place. And I understand the period upon which it was written. However, early in the book, I don't know if it's page 14 or 16, Bill talks about the family being destroyed, completely destroyed. So we know that. And I have to tell you that with my sponsees, Bill, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I have not taken them. We never read this chapter. I do not find anything instructive in it as a recovered alcoholic, and so we don't read it. I just feel it's just not necessary to debate what is being said, whether it's just not necessary. And it's not really helpful for me to understand the very clear-cut instructions of how to work the 12 steps. I just don't see that in there at all. But what Gigi said, there is no conclusive evidence that, because if we look, Al-Anon was not started for another 16 years. So what did the wives do? Because they certainly, I can't imagine them going through the hell of living with an active alcoholic, that they use this to work with their husbands on recovery. I just can't imagine that. So, I mean, do we know, and you've already answered this, so it's just not necessary for me to repeat. There's no conclusive evidence that this was ever used by women with their husbands. It's just incredible that it took so long for Al-Anon to get together, 16 years. So there had to have been something else. Yeah, because this is just not instructive for me. My opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Babette. Good. We'll move on to Hugh H. on Top of the Hill Group. Nice to see you, Hugh.
Good to be here. I wish I could make this every week, but I can't. Bill Wilson wrote an essay called Leadership in AA, Ever a Vital Need. It was in the Grapevine, and it's in the 9th concept in the service manual. But basically what it says, and this is not about leadership, it says, when people criticize you, look for what might be true in what they have to say. And so that's kind of the approach I take with parts of the big book that I don't like. I can almost always find something to reflect on about the way I've treated other people, or the way I've been in the past, or the way I still am today. And I think that's worth doing. You know, it's partly about what you focus on when you read these things. Of course, today, what we're focusing on is how it got written, which has a lot of additional controversy in it. But, you know, I've struggled with these parts of the big book too. But when we read it, I get something out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh, very much. You put your email, your details in the chat for your history meetings. You did, yeah. Joel is in Arizona.
Yes, Joel, alcoholic. I've been thinking about this chapter because it was shared at a meeting recently, and I pointed out what Bill just pointed out about, back then women were dependent on the man as the breadwinner, and he's trying to keep but I've been thinking a lot about it. In fact, just this morning I wrote up, usually I inform the group that Bill is pointing out there's going to be problems in early sobriety. And the thought came to me, like, after detox, you don't instantaneously get sober. You have a period of convalescence where you have a lot of mood changers. And that's what Bill was trying to warn people about, that this guy's going to be off the wall, at times. And that it's a process. We don't, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. Well, I was of the slower variety. And I talked about my own experience, that just because I was sober, I went through periods where I had mood swings and I was off the wall, bouncing off the wall. And even though I wasn't drinking, I still had a lot of emotional problems. And then I got into the book, and this is like years. I was a slow guy, I went through a recovering process, and then I finally got the spiritual awakening. And for me, it was 12 years in the program because I had untreated alcoholism, and I got into the book and I got recovered. And then I discovered just because you recovered, you could fall asleep and go back. So I try to inform people from Bill's perspective. You know, he was 3 years sober. We know a lot more about alcoholism, and it's not an overnight process. We're not going to get sober instantaneously. And just because we're sober, there's still a period of recovering, and we have to get to the point where we found some kind of spiritual connection, and we can say that we recovered. The book promises recovered, but we also fall asleep. So it's a process. You know, and Bill was doing the best he could at the time because the family was dependent on the man. The man was the breadwinner. Nowadays, women will divorce you in a New York minute. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Joel. And next week's chapter, by the way, is the family afterward and the authorship question, which is another intriguing chapter. We're going to be reading chapter 19, that is, and that's in October to November 1938. Let's go to Iceland with Susan.
Hi everyone, Susan Alcoholic.
Susan.
Great to be with you guys as always. Thank you. Oh, this chapter. Okay.
As well as the
Go ahead, Susan. You should be okay
I
now.
just wanted to add one little viewpoint that hasn't been mentioned today, which is actually my attempt to reconcile with Bill when I learned that he had written this chapter, this god-awful chapter. I needed to reconcile why did he do it? And I came to the conclusion that was helpful to me, and now I am using it in my guidance to my sponsees, which is that if we put ourselves in, because we are the alcoholics, and we actually read the chapter to understand what we need. What is Bill saying? He's describing his needs. He needs his wife to be tolerant, understanding, and all those good things. So for me, it's turning it around. And because, I haven't been working with men, obviously, but I can tell you for a fact that the women that I have come to learn in the last 5 years, their stories, it is an absolute 100%, I think, fact that there is so much self-loathing, there is so much guilt and shame, that when it comes to these very precarious first steps in sobriety, what we so desperately need is to be able to continue in faith that this is going to work, this program is going to work. And we are just desperately asking our closest by, our loved ones, for support. The only thing that is missing from this approach that I've reconciled with Bill is he doesn't link the 12th step, the helping others, the attention to others, to turn your attention to others in the 10th step. And he's training us to live in a new way, to approach life in a new way. But he doesn't mention that the alcoholic is now going to be turning his attention, because it's male, towards the wife. He never mentions that the newly sobered husband is now going to be more attentive, because he's been learning about that in the program. So there's a missing link there between what he is training us to become better persons and more holistically looking at our families with love and care. So the demand is all on the mate, on the wife. So I'm still working on that. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Susan. Bill, you okay? Bill, can I bring you back to chapter 1, Challenging the Creation Myths, Bill Wilson, Bill Sherberg, which is my favorite chapter of all time. You said Bill Wilson, for Bill, you said the point was that the story had to convey an important message about the program of recovery. And you say, and it needed to be dramatically delivered for maximum impact. You say in such cases, Wilson believed that this kind of falsification was more than justified, or at least inconsequential. You say just so long as it served his higher purpose. And when I was going through this chapter again, I just was blown away. On 359, you say this when Bill Wilson was writing to wives. You say it also provides, you say, a stark insight into just how desperately Bill wanted the new man to stay sober, even, you say, to the point of casually and comfortably, you say, foisting this huge burden of guilt off onto the wife should her husband ever go back to drinking. That's he's going to any lengths to get the message across, is he not?
Yeah.
To get that across.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Good stuff. Okay. Jim, are you good? Jim, what have you got to say to us about your upcoming meetings? You have a lot of good stuff coming up, have you, Jim? Any goodies for us other than working with us?
Well, I have one. I think the flyer will be out in a day or two. I have one coming up, I think, on the 7th, which is about a week from now. So, but the flyer will be out fairly soon. And I would just like to make one more comment, if I may. Especially based on something Hugh said and some other things that were said. You know, it's always take what you need and leave the rest. And I find that there are some things, you know, if you haven't heard the story, you know, there must be a pony in here somewhere. Some people have heard that story. And there's a pony in there somewhere, you know, and there are some good little nuggets in there, things. And so again, if I was a wife and I lived in 1939, I would have a different mentality than this man in 2026 has. And I have no documentation for this, you know how I am with expecting documentation. But I have no documentation, but I can fairly well guarantee that this chapter helped a lot of people. Men, women, family members. There's an old saying I heard years ago that says, there isn't anything that will work for everyone. And there isn't something that can't help somebody. And I think that a lot of people were probably, you know, helped by this, considering what other information was available at the time in 1939. And there were people, it was just another thing to look at and to read. And again, we all need support from other people. Now, demanding that support and getting into a lot of cultural things I don't want to do, but there are things in there that are good in the chapter. And I think getting the truth out to who wrote it, first of all, my guess is that 90% of alcoholics today do not know that Bill Wilson wrote it. And most, you know, don't read it or care much about it. But there's some good things in there. So take what you need, leave the rest, and thank you.
And if they subscribe to your Facebook channel, they'll definitely know about it. And that's AA History Only. We're going to close with Bill Sherbrooke. Sorry, we can't take any more questions. Bill has to go. But I was asked to just mention this by John. He asked me to just mention this. They're having a picnic, the historic weekend celebrating the 75th annual Stepping Stones Lowest Family Groups Picnic. So that's on Thursday, Sunday, June the 4th to the 7th. You can get more details on their website, of course. Stepping Stones website. I think it's hybrid. It is a hybrid thing as well. You can get the sense of being there by being at home, I suppose. So, Bill Sherbrooke, I do apologize. We do take advantage of you sometimes, and I appreciate all you do. So, I'm looking forward to going through your YouTube channel. Over to you, Bill Sherbrooke.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for showing up, making wonderful contributions. I love when we get into a discussion about this thing. And yeah, I think it's important, you know, positive attitude changes everything. There's got to be a pony here someplace. I like that. I'm good with that. Thanks, Jim. Let's have a moment of silence, and we're going to close with as I usually do with the Evening Gotha. Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken to the present moment. Take heed. Tonight your days are diminished by one. Do not squander your life. Thank you all. See you next week.
Thank you. Looking forward to it already. We're on
Thank
Family
you
Act
all.
next week. Family
Thanks,
Act.
Bill. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Phil.
all.
That was terrific. Thank you.
Thank you,
And it gets
everybody.
better.
Yeah.
It gets
Thank you,
better.
Bill. Thank you, everybody that puts this
Thanks,
together.
David.
This is
Thanks,
great.
everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bill. We'll see you next week.
Take care, everyone.
Getting
See
into the
you.
good stuff now.
See you sooner than later. Sooner, hopefully.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Gina T, the big book.
So, Jim, what is the pony joke?
Jim
I mean, I
got-
can sort of ascertain what it means.
You were asking about the pony story. Is that right? You want to know? So Jim mentioned obviously the pony. Here's what it says, Bob. It says, there's a famous joke about a child who wakes up on Christmas morning and is surprised to find a heap of horse manure under the tree instead of a collection of presents. Yet the child is not discouraged because he has an extraordinary optimistic outlook on life. His parents discover him enthusiastically shoveling the manure as he exclaims, with all this manure, there must be a pony somewhere. Let's just read what they say. New York Times language maven William Safar stated that the entire joke would be brought to mind for many readers by simply mentioning the punchline. There must be a pony in here somewhere. Oh, that's
Thank
funny.
you.
That's good. That's good.
That's
Let's
pretty
remember
funny.
that. That's a new slogan for Ada. There must be a pony in here somewhere.
That was good. Thank you, David. That was great. It was a great meeting.